Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification. This is a private club. The words cut through the evening air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Brad Stevens, 34, stood blocking the entrance to the Pinnacle Athletic Club in downtown Chicago, his security uniform pressed and his stance wide like he was guarding Fort Knox instead of a fitness facility. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on the woman in front of him with the kind of scrutiny reserved for suspects, not members. The woman standing in front of Brad was Simone Rivers, 29, and she looked exactly like what she was, someone who had just finished a 12-hour day running a business empire and wanted nothing more than to hit the gym she'd been a member of for 3 years. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore black leggings and a gray tank top, and her gym bag was slung over her shoulder like she'd done this routine 1,000 times before. Because she had. "I'm sorry, what?" Simone's voice was steady, but there was something in her tone that suggested she'd heard this song before and didn't like the melody. Brad stepped closer, his clipboard clutched like a weapon. "This is a private facility, members only. I need to verify your membership before you can enter." He said it loud enough for the small crowd gathering near the entrance to hear every word. The thing about the Pinnacle Athletic Club was that it prided itself on being exclusive. Not just expensive, but selective. Located in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, it catered to the city's elite, business executives, athletes, politicians, and old money families who treated their membership like a birthright. The monthly fees could cover most people's rent, and the waiting list was longer than some people's mortgage terms. Kyle Morrison, 26, stood behind the front desk inside the lobby, his pressed white shirt and nervous energy making him look like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd been working there for 8 months, long enough to know the unspoken rules and short enough to still feel uncomfortable about them. Through the glass doors, he could see the confrontation building, and something in his stomach twisted. "I've been a member here for 3 years, Simone said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who shouldn't have to explain herself. "My name is Simone Rivers. I'm here for my usual evening workout." Brad's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "I don't recognize you, and I know all the regular members." He gestured to his clipboard with exaggerated authority. "I'm going to need to see a membership card and photo ID." The small crowd near the entrance began to take notice. Lindsay Cooper, 31, a marketing executive who'd been coming to the club for 5 years, slowed her pace as she approached the doors. She'd never been stopped, never been questioned, never had to prove she belonged. She pulled out her phone instinctively, not yet recording, but ready. Jake Coleman, 38, a lawyer who prided himself on being observant, paused near the entrance. He'd seen Brad working security for months, had watched him wave through dozens of members without so much as a hello. The selective scrutiny was impossible to ignore. "Brad, right?" Simone's voice remained calm, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "I work out here Tuesday through Thursday evenings. I usually use the weights on the second floor, sometimes the pool. My membership is through the executive package. Would you like me to recite my member number?" Brad crossed his arms. "Anyone can memorize a number. I need to see physical proof of membership." That's when Jasmine Carter, 25, emerged from inside the club, her workout complete, towel draped around her neck. She'd been a member for 2 years, and she recognized the scene unfolding outside immediately. She'd lived it, her friends had lived it, and now she was watching it happen to someone else. "Simone!" Jasmine called out, pushing through the glass doors. "Girl, what's going on?" Brad stepped between them. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a security matter." Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. "Security matter? She's been coming here longer than I have. What are you talking about?" The crowd was growing now. Lindsay had her phone out, discreetly recording. Jake had moved closer, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Kyle, still behind the front desk, was watching through the glass with increasing discomfort. "I'm doing my job," Brad said, his voice rising slightly. "This is a private club, and I have the right to verify membership for anyone I don't recognize. But you don't recognize her? Jasmine's voice carried disbelief. She's here 3 times a week. She's always polite to staff. She tips the towel attendants. How do you not recognize her? Simone reached into her gym bag and pulled out her membership card, a sleek black card with gold lettering that screamed premium access. She held it up for Brad to see. Here's my card. Will this suffice? Brad took the card with 2 fingers like it might contaminate him. He studied it for a long moment, then handed it back. This could be fake. I'm going to need to verify this inside. The murmur from the crowd grew louder. Lindsay stepped forward, her phone now openly recording. Excuse me, but I've never had to verify my membership. I just walk in. Jake nodded. Same here. I've been coming here for years, and I've never been stopped. Brad's jaw tightened. Different people, different situations. I use my discretion. Your discretion? Simone's voice was still controlled, but there was steel underneath. And what exactly triggers your discretion? The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew the answer. No one wanted to say it out loud. From inside the club, Emily Gates, 42, the club manager, finally noticed the commotion. She'd been in her office dealing with vendor contracts when Kyle had knocked on her door, his face flushed with anxiety. Ms. Gates, there's a situation at the front entrance. He's questioning someone's membership. Emily looked up from her paperwork, annoyed. What kind of situation? He's asking for ID and verification from a member, a black woman, but she's been coming here for years. I've seen her myself. Emily's stomach dropped. She'd been managing the club for 6 years, had worked in hospitality for 12, and she knew exactly what this looked like. More importantly, she knew what it could cost them. How long has this been going on? She asked, already moving toward the door. About 10 minutes and people are filming. Emily's pace quickened. The Pinnacle Athletic Club had a reputation to maintain, and a reputation in their industry was everything. But more than that, she'd seen the damage that these kinds of incidents could cause, not just to business, but to real people who deserved better. Outside, the tension was escalating. Simone had provided her membership card, recited her member number, and answered every question Brad had thrown at her. But he wasn't backing down. I'm going to need to call this in, Brad said, reaching for his radio. Security protocol requires verification for suspicious circumstances. Suspicious circumstances? Simone's voice finally carried an edge. What exactly is suspicious about a woman in workout clothes coming to a gym? Jasmine stepped closer to her friend. This is ridiculous. Brad, you're embarrassing yourself. I'm doing my job, Brad repeated, but his voice lacked conviction now. The crowd was growing, phones were recording, and he was beginning to realize that his job might not be what he thought it was. Lindsay spoke up from behind her camera. For the record, I'm filming this. This is Lindsay Cooper, and we're at the Pinnacle Athletic Club in Chicago. I'm watching a security guard question a member's right to enter a facility she's been paying to use for years. Jake pulled out his own phone. I'm documenting this too. This is discriminatory behavior, and it's happening in real time. Brad's face flushed red. You can't film on private property. Actually, we can, Jake said, his lawyer voice kicking in. This is a public accommodation, and we have every right to document discriminatory treatment. The word discriminatory seemed to hit Brad like a physical blow. This isn't about, I treat everyone the same. Do you? Simone's voice was quiet, but it carried across the crowd. Do you really treat everyone the same, Brad? The question was simple, but it contained multitudes. It contained every time she'd been followed in a store, every time she'd been asked to prove she belonged somewhere, every time her presence had been treated as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be welcomed. Emily pushed through the glass doors, her professional smile firmly in place, but her eyes scanning the scene with growing alarm. She could see the phones recording, could hear the murmur of the crowd, could feel the weight of a situation that was spiraling out of control. Good evening, everyone, she said, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd dealt with crises before. I'm Emily Gates, the club manager. Is there something I can help with? Brad turned to her with relief. Ms. Gates, I was just verifying this woman's membership. She doesn't have proper identification. Emily looked at Simone, who was standing with quiet dignity in the center of the storm. She looked at the membership card in Simone's hand, the gym bag over her shoulder, the workout clothes that marked her as someone who belonged here. Then she looked at Brad and something in her chest tightened. "Ms. Rivers," Emily said, recognizing Simone immediately. "I'm so sorry about this confusion. Please come in." The crowd paused. The phones kept recording, and Brad Stevens realized that his night was about to get much, much worse. Emily Gates's recognition of Simone Rivers sent a ripple through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Faces turned, phones adjusted angles, and the uncomfortable silence stretched until it felt like it might snap. "You know her?" Brad's voice cracked slightly, the first sign that his confidence was beginning to crumble. "Of course I know her," Emily said, and there was something in her tone that suggested Brad should have known better. "Ms. Rivers has been a member here for 3 years. She's never missed a payment, never caused any issues, and she's always been respectful to our staff." Simone's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "Thank you, Emily, though I have to ask, why is my membership being questioned in the first place?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emily looked at Brad, who was suddenly very interested in his clipboard. She looked at the crowd, at the phone still recording, at the situation that was threatening to spiral completely out of control. "Let's discuss this inside," Emily said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of crisis management. "No." Simone's voice was firm but not loud. "Let's discuss this right here where it started, in front of everyone who witnessed it." Lindsay Cooper, still recording, spoke up. "She's right. This happened in public. The resolution should be public too." Jake Coleman nodded. "Transparency is important here." Emily felt the weight of a dozen eyes on her, the pressure of phones recording her every word, the knowledge that whatever happened next would define not just this moment, but potentially the future of the club itself. "Brad," she said, turning to face the security guard directly, "can you explain to me why you questioned Ms. Rivers' membership?" Brad shifted uncomfortably. I didn't recognize her. It's my job to verify members I don't recognize." "Is it?" Emily's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "Because I've watched you work for 8 months, and I've never seen you question anyone else's membership. Not once." The crowd murmured. Phones zoomed in, and somewhere in the back of the gathering, Tyrone Johnson, 33, a longtime member and successful entrepreneur, shook his head in disgust. He'd been coming to the club for 5 years, and he'd seen this pattern before. Different faces, same story. "That's not true," Brad protested. "I've questioned people before." "Really?" Jasmine Carter stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "Because I've been coming here for 2 years, and you've never questioned me. But then again, I usually come during lunch hours when you're not working." Emily turned to Kyle Morrison, who was still watching from behind the front desk. "Kyle, in your 8 months working here, have you ever seen Brad question a member's access?" Kyle's face went pale. He looked at Brad, then at Emily, then at the crowd of people waiting for his answer. His voice was barely above a whisper. Not like this. "No." "Not like what?" Emily pressed. Kyle swallowed hard. "Not where he made them prove they belonged." The admission hit the crowd like a physical blow. Lindsay's phone captured every word. Jake's recording caught the moment when Brad's face went from red to white. And Simone Rivers stood in the center of it all, vindicated but not victorious. "Brad," Emily said, her voice now carrying the weight of official authority, "I need you to explain to me, in front of everyone here, what made Ms. Rivers' presence suspicious." Brad looked around at the faces surrounding him. Some curious, some angry, some disappointed. He looked at Simone, who was waiting for his answer with the patience of someone who'd been through this before. He looked at his clipboard, as if it might contain the words that would save him. She looked. She looked like what?" Emily's voice was sharp now. "She looked like she didn't belong here." The words came out before Brad could stop them, and the moment they hit the air, everyone knew there was no taking them back. The crowd erupted. Not in shouting, but in that particular kind of murmur that comes when people witness something they know is wrong but aren't sure how to fix. Didn't belong here? Simone's voice was quiet, but it carried over the noise. And what exactly does someone who belongs here look like? Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked to Emily for help, but she was staring at him with the kind of expression that suggested help was not coming. I didn't mean... You didn't mean what? Simone took a step closer. You didn't mean to say exactly what you were thinking? You didn't mean to reveal exactly why you stopped me and no one else? From the crowd, Tyrone Johnson's voice cut through the tension. Man, just say what you mean. We all know what you mean. Brad turned to him, desperation creeping into his voice. I'm not. You're not what? Tyrone stepped forward, his successful businessman's suit contrasting sharply with Brad's security uniform. You're not the kind of person who makes assumptions based on skin color? Because that's exactly what you are. The words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be denied. Brad looked around at the faces surrounding him, and for the first time he seemed to realize that this wasn't a misunderstanding that could be explained away. Lindsay spoke into her phone camera. This is what systemic discrimination looks like. Not burning crosses or shouting slurs, but quiet assumptions about who belongs where. Jake nodded, his lawyer instincts kicking in. This is a clear violation of civil rights. A business open to the public cannot discriminate based on race. Emily felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She'd been managing the club for 6 years, had dealt with difficult members, staff issues, and budget problems. But she'd never dealt with anything like this. More importantly, she'd never had to confront the possibility that her staff was actively discriminating against paying members. Brad, she said, her voice carrying the weight of finality, I need you to apologize to Ms. Rivers and then report to my office immediately. Brad looked around at the crowd, at the phone still recording, at the situation that had spiraled completely beyond his control. I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding. If? Simone's voice was sharp now. There was no misunderstanding. You saw a black woman in workout clothes and decided she didn't belong here. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racism. The word hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Some people nodded, others looked uncomfortable, but no one disagreed. I'm not racist, Brad said, his voice desperate now. I was doing my job. Your job, Simone repeated. Your job is to make members feel unwelcome? Your job is to humiliate people who pay thousands of dollars to be here. Your job is to assume that black people don't belong in elite spaces. Each question hit like a hammer blow. Brad had no answers. He looked to Emily, but she was watching him with the kind of expression that suggested his time at the club was rapidly coming to an end. Ms. Rivers, Emily said, turning to address Simone directly, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about this. This is not the standard we hold ourselves to, and it's not the experience any of our members should have. But it is the experience, Simone said. It's the experience I'm having right now. It's the experience that your security guard felt comfortable giving me in front of a crowd, which suggests it's not the first time. The implication hung in the air like a challenge. Emily looked at Kyle, who was still watching from behind the desk. She looked at the crowd, at the phones recording, at the situation that was quickly becoming a crisis. Kyle, she called out, has anything like this happened before? Kyle's face went even paler. He looked at Brad, then at Emily, then at the crowd of people waiting for his answer. His voice was barely audible. I don't know if I should... You should tell the truth, Jasmine said firmly. If this has happened before, people need to know. Kyle took a deep breath. There was an incident last month. A black gentleman was questioned about his guest pass, and another time, a woman was asked to provide additional identification even though she'd been coming here for months. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Lindsay's phone captured every word. Jake was taking notes on his own phone. And Simone Rivers stood in the center of it all, vindicated but not surprised. A pattern, she said quietly. This isn't an isolated incident. This is how you operate. Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't just about one security guard's poor judgment. This was about systemic issues within the club, about patterns of discrimination that had been allowed to continue unchecked. "Ms. Rivers," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. "I want to make this right. Tell me what you need." Simone looked around at the crowd, at the phones still recording, at the moment that had become something much bigger than one woman trying to get into a gym. "I need you to understand that this isn't about me," she said. "This is about every black person who's been made to feel like they don't belong in spaces they pay for. This is about every person who's been quietly discriminated against while others looked the other way." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And I need you to understand that I'm not just a member of this club. I'm the owner of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Phones stopped moving, people stopped breathing, and Brad Stevens realized that his night was about to become a nightmare. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "I'm the owner of it." 5 simple words that changed everything about the scene unfolding in front of the Pinnacle Athletic Club. Brad Stevens' clipboard slipped from his hands and clattered to the ground. Kyle Morrison's mouth fell open behind the front desk. Emily Gates felt her stomach drop to her feet. And the crowd that had gathered to witness what they thought was a discrimination incident realized they were actually watching something much bigger unfold. "The owner?" Lindsay Cooper's voice was barely above a whisper, but her phone captured every syllable. Simone Rivers stood in the center of the crowd, still wearing her simple workout clothes, still carrying her gym bag, still looking like exactly what she was, a successful businesswoman who'd wanted nothing more than to work out after a long day. But now everyone could see what Brad had missed, what his assumptions had blinded him to. "That's impossible," Brad said, his voice cracking. "The owner is, I was told." "You were told what?" Simone's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "What exactly were you told about the owner?" Emily stepped forward, her face pale. "Ms. Rivers, I had no idea you were—" "You had no idea because I prefer to keep my ownership quiet," Simone interrupted. "I like to see how my business actually operates when people think no one's watching." The implication hit the crowd like a physical blow. This wasn't just about one security guard's discrimination. This was about how the club operated when they thought the owner wasn't around. Jake Coleman, still recording, spoke into his phone. "This is unprecedented. We're watching a business owner experience discrimination at her own establishment." Tyrone Johnson shook his head in disgust. "Man, this is exactly why we can't have nice things. They hire people who don't think we belong in our own spaces." From behind the front desk, Kyle Morrison's voice was barely audible. I didn't know. Ms. Gates, I swear I didn't know." "But you knew something was wrong," Simone said, turning to face him. "You knew what was happening out here wasn't right. You could have intervened." Kyle's face crumpled. I didn't want to get involved. I thought it would work itself out." "It would work itself out," Simone repeated. "You thought a black woman being publicly humiliated would just work itself out." The words hit Kyle like a slap. He looked down at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. Jasmine Carter stepped closer to her friend. "Simone, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to be treated like a regular member," Simone said. "I wanted to work out in peace without people treating me differently because of what I own." She looked around at the crowd, at the phone still recording, at the moment that had become something much bigger than anyone had expected. "I bought this club 3 years ago," she continued. "It was struggling financially, had a reputation for being exclusionary, and needed a complete overhaul. I thought I could change the culture, make it more welcoming, more inclusive." Her eyes found Brad, who was standing frozen in place. "I guess I was wrong." Emily stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Ms. Rivers, I don't know what to say. This is unacceptable." "Is it?" Simone's voice carried a challenge. "Because it happened, in front of witnesses, with cameras rolling, which suggests it's not just acceptable, it's normal." Lindsay spoke up from behind her camera. "How long have you owned the club?" 3 years, Simone repeated. 3 years of coming here as a regular member, watching how staff treated different people, seeing who was made to feel welcome and who wasn't. And you've seen this before? Jake asked. Simone nodded. Not this blatant, but yes, I've seen the pattern, the subtle ways some members get treated differently, the assumptions people make about who belongs here. She looked directly at Brad, who was still standing in stunned silence. But I've never seen it directed at me, because I've never been here when you were working the evening shift. The crowd murmured. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about systematic issues that had been allowed to fester. Brad, Emily said, her voice carrying the weight of authority, I need you to report to my office immediately. Wait, Simone said, holding up a hand. I want to hear his explanation first. I want to understand what made him think it was appropriate to treat the owner of this establishment like a criminal. Brad looked around at the faces surrounding him. Some angry, some disappointed, some curious about what he would say next. He looked at Simone, who was waiting for his answer with the patience of someone who'd been through this before. I didn't know, he said finally. You didn't know I was the owner, Simone said. But you knew I was a human being. You knew I was a woman in workout clothes coming to a gym. What made you think that was suspicious? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Brad looked down at his feet, then back up at Simone, then around at the crowd that was waiting for his answer. I guess I thought... You thought what? I thought you looked out of place. The admission came out in a whisper, but in the silence that followed, everyone heard it clearly. Out of place, Simone repeated. In workout clothes, at a gym, during evening hours when I work out 3 times a week. She took a step closer to Brad, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. What exactly about me looked out of place? Brad's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, because they both knew the answer, and everyone in the crowd knew it too. You know what? Simone said, her voice carrying a resignation that was somehow more devastating than anger. Don't answer that. We all know what you were thinking. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying over the evening air. This is what unconscious bias looks like. This is what happens when people make assumptions about who belongs where based on nothing more than appearance. Lindsay lowered her phone slightly. What happens now? Simone looked around at the faces surrounding her. Members who'd witnessed discrimination at their own club. Staff who'd failed to prevent it. A security guard who'd perpetuated it. Now we deal with it, she said simply. Emily stepped forward. Ms. Rivers, I take full responsibility for this. Brad was hired under my watch, and this happened on my shift. Taking responsibility is a start, Simone said, but it's not enough. This isn't just about one person's actions. This is about a culture that allowed those actions to happen. She looked at Kyle, who was still watching from behind the front desk. Kyle, how many times have you seen members questioned about their right to be here? Kyle's voice was barely audible. I don't know. Maybe 5 or 6 times since I started working here. And how many of those members were black? Kyle's face went pale. All of them. The admission hit the crowd like a physical blow. This wasn't isolated. This wasn't accidental. This was a pattern. All of them, Simone repeated. Every single person who was questioned about their right to be here was black. She turned to face Emily directly. And you, as the manager, were never made aware of this pattern? Emily's voice was shaking. No, I was never told about any of these incidents. Because they weren't reported, Simone said. Because staff members like Kyle saw what was happening and chose not to get involved. The weight of the moment settled on the crowd like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about one security guard's poor judgment. This was about systemic issues that had been allowed to continue unchecked. Ms. Rivers, a voice called out from the back of the crowd. What are you going to do about this? Simone turned to see who had spoken. It was an older woman she didn't recognize, someone who must have been drawn to the commotion from the street. I'm going to make sure it never happens again, she said simply. How? Simone looked around at the faces surrounding her. Members, staff, witnesses to a moment that had become something much bigger than anyone had expected. I'm going to start by firing everyone who was involved in this incident. The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Brad's face went white. Kyle looked like he might be sick. Emily took a step back as if she'd been physically struck. Everyone? Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. Everyone, Simone confirmed. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum. This happened because of a culture that allowed it to happen. She looked at Brad, who was still standing in stunned silence. You're fired, effective immediately. Then she looked at Kyle. You're fired for failing to intervene when you saw discrimination happening. Finally, she looked at Emily. And you're fired for failing to create a culture where discrimination couldn't happen. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Phones captured every word, and 3 people who'd started the evening with jobs realized they were ending it without them. But Simone Rivers wasn't finished. I'm also going to make a public apology to every member who's been discriminated against at this club, and I'm going to implement new policies to make sure this never happens again. She looked around at the faces surrounding her. Because this isn't just about me. This is about every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong in spaces they pay for. And that ends today. The words "you're fired" echoed through the evening air like a gavel striking wood. 3 people who'd started their shift thinking they were just doing their jobs now stood facing the consequences of assumptions they'd made and actions they'd taken. Brad Stevens stared at Simone Rivers as if she'd just spoken in a foreign language. You can't fire me. I work for the club, not for you. I am the club, Simone said, her voice carrying the weight of ownership that could no longer be denied. I own this building, I pay your salary, and I decide who works here. Emily Gates felt her knees go weak. 6 years of managing the club, 6 years of building relationships with members, 6 years of career advancement, gone in an instant. Ms. Rivers, please. I understand you're upset, but surely we can discuss this privately. Privately? Simone's voice carried a note of disbelief. This happened publicly, in front of witnesses, with cameras rolling. The response needs to be just as public. Lindsay Cooper was still recording, her phone capturing every word of what was becoming a masterclass in immediate consequences. This is unprecedented, she murmured to her camera. We're watching real-time accountability. Jake Coleman nodded, his lawyer instincts recognizing the historical significance of the moment. This is what justice looks like when people in power take immediate action. Kyle Morrison stood behind the front desk, his face pale as paper. Ms. Rivers, I didn't know you were the owner. I would never have... You would never have what? Simone interrupted. You would never have stood by and watched if you knew I was the owner, but you were perfectly fine standing by and watching when you thought I was just another member being discriminated against. The question hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be denied. Kyle looked down at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. From the crowd, Tyrone Johnson's voice cut through the tension. That's exactly the problem. You only care about doing the right thing when you think the boss is watching. Jasmine Carter stepped closer to her friend. Simone, I support whatever you decide to do, but are you sure about firing everyone? What about second chances? Simone looked at her friend, someone who'd always been supportive, someone who understood the weight of being one of the few black members at an elite club. Jasmine, how many second chances do you think I've gotten when I've been discriminated against? She asked. How many times has someone said, sorry, I didn't know better, and been given another opportunity to treat me like a human being? The question hit the crowd like a physical blow, because everyone knew the answer. There were no second chances for being treated with dignity. There were no do-overs for being made to feel welcome in spaces you paid to access. This isn't about revenge, Simone continued. This is about accountability, and accountability means consequences. Emily stepped forward, her voice shaking. Ms. Rivers, I take full responsibility for what happened, but please consider the impact on the other employees. Kyle is a good kid who made a mistake. And Brad? Well, Brad has issues, but he has a family. He has a family, Simone repeated. And I'm sure his family would be proud to know that he spent his evening humiliating a paying customer based on the color of her skin. Emily's face crumpled. That's not... I don't think he meant... What he meant doesn't matter, Simone said, her voice cutting through the evening air with surgical precision. What matters is what he did. What matters is that he felt comfortable doing it. What matters is that you created an environment where he thought that behavior was acceptable. The crowd had grown larger now. Word was spreading through the Gold Coast neighborhood, and people were stopping to see what was happening at the exclusive club. Some were filming with their phones. Others were just watching in stunned silence. Nick Chapman, 41, a journalist for the Chicago Tribune who happened to be walking by, recognized the significance of what he was witnessing. He pulled out his phone and started recording, his reporter instincts kicking in. "Excuse me," he called out, identifying himself. "I'm Nick Chapman with the Tribune. Ms. Rivers, is it? Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Simone looked at the journalist, then at the crowd, then at the phones still recording. She realized that this moment was going to define not just her club, but potentially serve as an example for how businesses should handle discrimination. "What happened here tonight," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd, "is that a black woman in workout clothes was treated like a criminal for trying to enter a gym she owns." Nick's eyebrows shot up. "You own this club?" "I've owned it for 3 years," Simone confirmed. "And in those 3 years, I've been working to change the culture, to make it more inclusive, to ensure that all members feel welcome regardless of their background." She gestured to Brad, who was still standing in stunned silence. "Apparently, I failed." "Ms. Rivers," Nick said, his journalist instincts engaged, "what specific changes are you planning to implement?" Simone looked around at the faces surrounding her. This was no longer just about one incident. This was about using this moment to create lasting change. "First, we're implementing mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff members. Not just a one-time workshop, but ongoing education about how to recognize and interrupt discriminatory behavior." She looked at Kyle, who was still watching from behind the front desk. "Second, we're establishing a clear protocol for how members should be greeted and treated. No one should have to prove they belong here." Then she looked at Emily. "Third, we're creating an anonymous reporting system so that members can report discrimination without fear of retaliation." Nick was taking notes on his phone. "And what about the staff members involved in tonight's incident?" "They've been terminated," Simone said simply, "effective immediately." A murmur went through the crowd. Lindsay Cooper, still recording, spoke up. "Is that legal? Can you fire someone on the spot like that?" Jake Coleman, the lawyer, nodded. "In Illinois, it's an at-will employment state. An employer can terminate an employee for any reason that's not protected by law, and discrimination is definitely grounds for immediate termination." Brad finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous. I was doing my job. I was following protocol." "Whose protocol?" Simone asked. "Because I never authorized a protocol that allowed security guards to humiliate members based on their race." It wasn't about race," Brad protested. "I would have done the same thing to anyone I didn't recognize." "Really?" Tyrone Johnson stepped forward from the crowd. "Because I've been coming here for 5 years and you've never once asked me for ID. But then again, I usually come during the day when you're not working." He looked around at the crowd, then back at Brad. "But my wife? My wife came here last month in the evening, and guess what happened to her?" The crowd went silent, phones turned toward Tyrone, waiting for his answer. "She was questioned, asked for ID, made to feel like she didn't belong, and when she told me about it, I thought maybe she was being too sensitive." His voice carried the weight of regret. "I should have known better. I should have said something then." Simone looked at Tyrone with recognition. "Your wife is Dr. Angela Johnson, isn't she? The cardiologist?" "Yes," Tyrone said, his voice heavy. "She's been saving lives for 15 years, and your security guard made her feel like a criminal for trying to use the pool she pays to access." The crowd murmured. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about a pattern of discrimination that had been allowed to continue unchecked. "How many others?" Simone asked, addressing the crowd. "How many other members have experienced something like this?" A woman in the back raised her hand tentatively. I'm not a member, but I came here as a guest last year. I was meeting my friend for lunch, and security made me wait in the lobby while they verified my guest status." "And I'm assuming your friend is white?" Simone asked. The woman nodded. She said she'd never had to verify a guest before. She was embarrassed, but she didn't know what to do. More hands went up. More stories emerged. A pattern of discrimination that had been hiding in plain sight, dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Nick was recording everything, his journalist instincts recognizing that this was a much bigger story than one security guard's poor judgment. "Ms. Rivers," he said, "how do you plan to address the systemic issues that allowed this pattern to develop?" Simone looked around at the faces surrounding her. Members who'd been discriminated against, staff who'd failed to act, and witnesses who were seeing the reality of unconscious bias played out in real time. "I'm going to start by acknowledging that I failed," she said. "I thought I could change the culture gradually, quietly. I thought I could lead by example without making waves." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But gradual change doesn't work when people are being harmed. Quiet change doesn't work when discrimination is happening openly." She looked directly at the cameras recording her. "So I'm making a public commitment. This club will become a model for how businesses should handle discrimination. We will be transparent about our failures, aggressive about our solutions, and accountable for our results." Emily, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally spoke up. "Ms. Rivers, I understand that you're angry, but destroying careers isn't going to solve systemic racism." "I'm not destroying careers," Simone said. "I'm ending careers that were built on the foundation of making people feel unwelcome in spaces they pay to access." She looked at Emily with something that might have been pity. "You had 6 years to create an inclusive environment. 6 years to train your staff properly. 6 years to ensure that every member felt valued and welcome." Her voice hardened. "Instead, you created an environment where security guards felt comfortable publicly humiliating Black members, where front desk staff felt comfortable ignoring discrimination, where patterns of bias were allowed to continue unchecked." The crowd was silent now, understanding the weight of what they were witnessing. "You didn't just fail to prevent discrimination," Simone continued. "You enabled it through your inaction." Kyle finally spoke up from behind the front desk. "Ms. Rivers, I know I made a mistake, but I've learned from this. I'll never let something like this happen again." "You're right," Simone said. "You'll never let something like this happen again, because you won't be here to let it happen." She looked around at the crowd. "This isn't about punishment. This is about accountability. And accountability means that actions have consequences." Nick raised his hand. "Ms. Rivers, what message do you want to send to other business owners who might be dealing with similar issues?" Simone thought for a moment, understanding that her answer would likely be quoted in newspapers and shared on social media. "I want them to understand that good intentions aren't enough. Thinking you're not racist isn't enough. That hoping discrimination will solve itself isn't enough." She looked directly into the camera. "You have to be actively anti-racist. You have to create systems that prevent discrimination. You have to be willing to confront bias when you see it, even when it's uncomfortable." A voice from the crowd called out, "What about the members who witnessed discrimination and didn't speak up?" Simone looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some looked guilty. Others looked defensive. All of them looked uncomfortable. "That's a fair question," she said, "and it's one that every person here needs to answer for themselves." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "But I will say this. Silence in the face of discrimination is complicity. And I hope that everyone who witnessed tonight's events will remember that the next time they see someone being treated unfairly." Lindsay Cooper lowered her phone. "Ms. Rivers, thank you for handling this so transparently. It's refreshing to see a business owner take immediate action." "Don't thank me yet," Simone said. "Thank me when the club is actually inclusive. Thank me when no member ever has to experience what I experienced tonight." She looked around at the crowd one more time. "This is just the beginning." The crowd began to disperse slowly, like people leaving a powerful performance that had left them emotionally drained. Phones were still recording, conversations were still happening, but the immediate crisis had passed. What remained was the heavy weight of what everyone had witnessed, and the knowledge that nothing would ever be quite the same. Nick Chapman was still interviewing members. gathering quotes for what he already knew would be a front-page story. The journalist in him recognized that this wasn't just a local news item. This was a story that would resonate far beyond Chicago. "Dr. Johnson," he said, approaching Tyrone, who was still standing near the entrance. "Can you tell me about your wife's experience here?" Tyrone's face tightened. "Angela came here after a 14-hour shift at the hospital. She's been saving lives all day, and she just wanted to swim some laps to decompress. But your security guard, different guy but same attitude, made her feel like she was trying to break into Fort Knox." He looked back at the club entrance where Brad was still standing in stunned silence. "She came home that night and asked me if maybe we should find a different gym. A woman who performs heart surgery was made to feel like she didn't belong at a place she pays $3,000 a month to access." Nick was taking notes rapidly. "Did you complain to management?" "I should have," Tyrone said, his voice heavy with regret. "But Angela asked me not to. She said she didn't want to be seen as the angry black woman making complaints. She just wanted to work out in peace." The weight of that admission hung in the air. How many other incidents had gone unreported because people didn't want to be seen as troublemakers? Inside the club, Simone was having a different conversation with the remaining staff members who had gathered in the lobby. Word had spread quickly through the building, and employees were trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for their jobs. "I want to be clear," Simone said, addressing the group of about 15 staff members. "What happened tonight was unacceptable, but it wasn't just about one security guard's actions. It was about a culture that allowed those actions to happen." Maria Santos, 28, a personal trainer who'd been working at the club for 2 years, raised her hand. "Ms. Rivers, I had no idea you were the owner, but I've seen incidents that made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do about them." "What kind of incidents?" Simone asked. Maria looked around at her co-workers, then back at Simone. "Members being questioned about their right to be here. Guests being made to wait while their hosts were verified. It always seemed to happen to the same type of people." "And you didn't report it?" I didn't know who to report it to, and I was worried about my job." Simone nodded, understanding the impossible position that had put Maria in. "That's exactly why we need to change the culture here. No employee should have to choose between doing the right thing and keeping their job." David Kim, 35, the head of maintenance, spoke up. "Ms. Rivers, what does this mean for those of us who weren't involved in tonight's incident?" "It means you have an opportunity," Simone said. "An opportunity to be part of creating a better workplace, a more inclusive environment, a place where discrimination isn't tolerated." She looked around at the faces of her employees. "But it also means that the bar has been raised. The old standards of just doing your job and minding your own business aren't enough anymore. We need active allies, people who will speak up when they see discrimination happening." Outside, the crowd had thinned, but the conversations were continuing. Lindsay Cooper was still recording, now interviewing other members about their experiences at the club. "I've been coming here for 4 years, said Jennifer Gates, 39, no relation to the manager. "And I've never had any problems, but I'm also—" She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. "I'm also a white woman from Lincoln Park. Maybe I haven't had problems because I look like what people expect to see here." It was a moment of honest self-reflection that captured the complexity of the situation. Jake Coleman was talking to a group of members who had witnessed the incident. "As a lawyer, I can tell you that what we saw tonight was a clear case of discrimination. But more than that, it was a masterclass in how to handle it." "You think she did the right thing?" asked Susan Morrison, 52, Kyle's mother, who had arrived after hearing about her son's firing. "I think she did the only thing," Jake replied. "Discrimination thrives in environments where there are no consequences. Ms. Rivers made it clear that there will be consequences." Susan's face was pained. "But Kyle is a good kid. He made a mistake, but he's not a racist." "Ma'am," said Jasmine Carter, who had overheard the conversation, "with all due respect, your son stood by and watched while a black woman was humiliated. Whether he's racist or not, his actions contributed to discrimination." The conversation was difficult, but it was the kind of conversation that needed to happen. Back inside the club, Simone was meeting with the remaining management team. There were only 3 of them left after Emily's firing, and they were trying to understand how to move forward. "I know this is difficult," Simone said, addressing Mary Sue, 44, the assistant manager, Robert Torres, 38, the fitness director, and Amanda Foster, 31, the events coordinator. "But we have an opportunity to rebuild this place into something better." "What do you need from us?" Mary asked. "I need you to help me understand how deep these problems go," Simone said. "I need you to be honest about what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've maybe ignored because it wasn't your job to deal with it." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "There have been incidents, comments from members about other members, complaints that seem to follow certain patterns." "What kind of patterns?" "Complaints about the locker room being too crowded that always seemed to come when certain members were using it. Comments about music being too loud that only happened during certain times. Requests for enhanced security that seemed to coincide with specific events." Simone felt her stomach tighten. This was worse than she'd thought. "And these complaints were taken seriously?" "Some were," Amanda said quietly. "There were members who threatened to cancel their memberships if their concerns weren't addressed." "So you addressed them?" We tried to find compromises. Quiet the music. Limit locker room access during peak hours. Increase security presence during certain events." The words hung in the air like an admission of guilt. "So instead of confronting discrimination, you enabled it," Simone said. The 3 managers looked at each other, then at Simone, understanding that they were part of the problem she was trying to solve. "What do you want us to do?" Mary asked. "I want you to help me fix this," Simone said. "But I need to know that you're committed to real change, not just avoiding problems." Outside, the last of the crowd was dispersing. Brad Stevens was walking to his car, his security uniform feeling heavier with each step. He pulled out his phone and called his wife. "Hey, honey," he said when she answered. I lost my job tonight." "What happened?" Brad paused, trying to figure out how to explain what he'd done. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "A big one." Emily Gates was sitting in her car in the parking lot, staring at the club she'd managed for 6 years. Her phone was buzzing with messages from friends and family who had seen the videos on social media, but she couldn't bring herself to answer them. Kyle Morrison was at home, trying to explain to his parents what had happened. His father, a police officer, was asking hard questions about whether Kyle had done anything wrong. "I didn't do anything," Kyle kept saying. I didn't do anything." And that, his father realized, was exactly the problem. Meanwhile, Simone was still at the club, working with her remaining staff to figure out how to move forward. The immediate crisis had passed, but the real work was just beginning. "We need to close tomorrow," she told Mary. "I want to bring in diversity consultants, train everyone from scratch, and reopen with clear policies and procedures." "That's going to cost a lot of money," Mary said. "Discrimination has already cost us more," Simone replied. "It's cost us our reputation, our credibility, and the trust of our members." She looked around at the empty lobby, thinking about all the work that needed to be done. "We're going to rebuild this place from the ground up, and we're going to do it right this time." The story broke online before the morning newspapers even hit the stands. Lindsay Cooper's video had been shared thousands of times within hours, and by dawn, Nair Pinnacle Club was trending on social media. The hashtag carried a mix of outrage, support, and debate about discrimination in elite spaces. Nick Chapman's article for the Chicago Tribune went live at 6 a.m. with the headline, "Black Business Owner Experiences Discrimination at Her Own Club, Fires Staff on Spot." The story was picked up by national outlets within hours. But the real ripple effect was happening in the conversations taking place in homes, offices, and coffee shops across Chicago and beyond. Dr. Angela Johnson was having breakfast with her husband when her phone started buzzing with messages from friends and colleagues. "It's everywhere," she told Tyrone, scrolling through her social media feeds. "Your quote is being shared by everyone." Tyrone looked at his wife, seeing the mix of vindication and exhaustion in her eyes. "How do you feel about it?" Relieved, Angela said. For the first time in months, I feel like someone actually listened. She paused, reading another message, but also tired. Tired of having to prove that these things happen. Tired of people acting surprised that discrimination exists in places like this. At Northwestern University, Professor Janet Grace was using the incident as a teaching moment in her sociology class about institutional racism. What we witnessed last night, she told her students, is what sociologists call gatekeeping, the process by which certain groups are excluded from accessing spaces and resources. A student raised her hand. But the owner fired everyone involved. Doesn't that show the system working? It shows one person taking action, Professor Grace replied. But think about how many incidents like this happen without someone with the power to fire people being present. Think about how many Brad Stevens are out there, making assumptions about who belongs where. The discussion that followed was heated but productive, with students sharing their own experiences of being made to feel out of place in various settings. Meanwhile, at the Chicago Commission on Human Relations, Director Michael Rodriguez was fielding calls from reporters and community activists about the incident. This is exactly why we need stronger enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, he told a reporter from WGN. But more than that, we need businesses to be proactive about creating inclusive environments. He was already planning to use the Pinnacle Club incident as a case study in the Commission's upcoming training programs for business owners. Back at the club, Simone was meeting with Dr. Sandra Ellis, 51, a diversity consultant who had arrived at 7 a.m. to begin assessing the situation. The immediate firing was necessary, Dr. Ellis said after hearing the full story. But the real work starts now. We need to understand how deep these problems go. She had already begun interviewing staff members, and the picture that was emerging was troubling. It's not just about security guards questioning members, she told Simone. It's about a culture where certain members feel entitled to complain about other members' presence, where staff feel pressured to accommodate those complaints, and where discrimination gets disguised as maintaining standards. Simone nodded grimly. What do you recommend? Complete cultural overhaul. New policies, new training, new accountability measures, and you need to be prepared for pushback. What kind of pushback? Some members aren't going to like the changes. They joined this club because it was exclusive, and they may interpret inclusivity as a threat to that exclusivity. As if on cue, Simone's phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of Harrison Blackwood, 58, one of the club's founding members and a major donor. Simone, his voice was stern when she answered. I understand there was some kind of incident last night. There was, she confirmed. Discrimination against a member. I've terminated the staff members involved. Don't you think that's a bit extreme? Couldn't this have been handled more quietly? The question hung in the air between them. Simone recognized the code words. Handled more quietly meant swept under the rug, ignored, forgotten. No, Harrison, it couldn't have been handled more quietly, because handling things quietly is how we got here in the first place. But think about the club's reputation, this kind of publicity. This kind of publicity is exactly what we need, Simone interrupted. We need people to understand that discrimination won't be tolerated here. I'm not sure all the members will agree with that approach. Then maybe those members should find a different club. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Harrison Blackwood had been one of the club's most influential members for 20 years. His opinion carried weight with other wealthy donors. I think we need to have a board meeting, he said finally. We'll have a board meeting, Simone agreed. But my position isn't going to change. This club will be inclusive, or it won't be my club. After hanging up, Simone turned to Dr. Ellis. And so it begins. This is actually a good sign, Dr. Ellis said. If you're getting pushback from members who benefited from the old system, it means you're making real change. That afternoon, Simone held a press conference at the club. She had spent the morning preparing with a crisis communications specialist, but she was determined to speak from the heart. Last night, I experienced something that no member of this club should ever have to experience, she began, standing in front of the club's main entrance. I was questioned, humiliated, and made to feel like I didn't belong in a space I own. The gathered reporters and cameras captured every word, but this isn't about me. This is about the systematic discrimination that has been allowed to flourish in elite spaces across this country. It's about the assumptions people make about who belongs where based on nothing more than appearance. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. I'm not just the owner of this club. I'm a member of this community. And I'm committed to making sure that every member of this community feels welcome in the spaces they pay to access. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Rivers, some people are saying that your response was too extreme, that you should have given the staff members involved a chance to learn from their mistakes. I understand that perspective, Simone said, but I would ask those people to consider this. How many chances do you think I've been given to learn from my mistakes when I've been discriminated against? She looked around at the faces of the reporters. The answer is zero. When you're on the receiving end of discrimination, you don't get chances to learn. You get humiliated, excluded, and made to feel less than human. Another reporter spoke up. What changes are you implementing to prevent this from happening again? We're completely overhauling our policies and procedures. Every staff member will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. We're implementing new protocols for member interactions. And we're creating anonymous reporting systems so that discrimination can be reported without fear of retaliation. And if members don't like these changes, then they're welcome to find a club that better aligns with their values, Simone said firmly. But this club will be a place where everyone feels welcome. The press conference was covered live by several local news stations, and clips were shared widely on social media. The response was mixed but intense. Some people praised Simone for taking immediate action and using her platform to address discrimination. Others criticized her for being too harsh, arguing that the staff members deserved a chance to learn from their mistakes. But the conversation was happening. People were talking about unconscious bias, about discrimination in elite spaces, about the responsibility of business owners to create inclusive environments. That evening, Simone was back at the club working with Dr. Ellis and her remaining staff to develop new policies. The work was exhausting, but she was determined to get it right. We need to think about every interaction a member has from the moment they approach the building, Dr. Ellis was saying. The greeting at the door, the check-in process, the way staff respond to questions or concerns. Mary Sue, the assistant manager, was taking notes. What about member complaints? How do we handle it when someone complains about another member? We investigate every complaint fairly, Dr. Ellis said. But we also train staff to recognize when complaints might be motivated by bias rather than legitimate concerns. How do we tell the difference? Asked Robert Torres. Patterns, Dr. Ellis replied. If someone only complains about certain types of people, or if their complaints seem to be about someone's presence rather than their behavior, those are red flags. They worked until nearly midnight, developing policies, procedures, and training materials. It was just the beginning of a long process, but Simone felt hopeful for the first time in months. This is what real change looks like, she told Dr. Ellis as they prepared to leave. It's hard work, it's uncomfortable, and it requires constant vigilance. But it's necessary. Are you prepared for the long haul? Dr. Ellis asked. Because this kind of cultural change doesn't happen overnight. I've been preparing for this my whole life, Simone said. Every time I've been discriminated against, every time I've been made to feel like I don't belong, I've been preparing for this moment. She looked around at the empty club, imagining what it could become. This is just the beginning. The Pinnacle Athletic Club reopened 2 weeks after the incident with a new mission statement prominently displayed in the lobby. A space where everyone belongs, everyone is valued, and everyone is welcome. The changes were immediately visible. New staff members, all trained in anti-bias protocols, greeted every person who entered with the same warmth and professionalism. The check-in process was streamlined and consistent, and most importantly, there was a palpable shift in the culture of the place. Dr. Angela Johnson was in the pool, swimming her regular laps after a long day in the operating room. The new evening security guard, Maria Santos, who had been promoted from personal trainer, waved at her as she passed by the pool area. "Good evening, Dr. Johnson," Maria called out. "Hope you have a great workout." It was a small interaction, but it represented something much bigger. Angela felt seen, valued, and welcome in a way she never had before. In the weight room, Tyrone Johnson was spotting for a new member, a young black lawyer named Jordan Davis who had joined after hearing about the club's transformation. "How do you like it so far?" Tyrone asked. "It's different from what I expected," Jordan replied. "In a good way. I was worried it would be stuffy and unwelcoming, but everyone here seems genuinely happy to see me." That was exactly what Simone had been hoping for. She was in her office, reviewing the quarterly membership report with Mary Sue, who had been promoted to general manager after proving herself during the transition period. "We lost about 15% of our membership," Mary reported, "but we've gained 20% new members, and our retention rate for new members is higher than it's ever been." "What about the complaints?" Simone asked. "Down 70%, Mary said. "And the ones we do get are about legitimate issues, equipment problems, scheduling conflicts, actual policy violations. No more complaints about other members' presence?" "None in the last month," Mary confirmed. "And when we do get complaints that seem motivated by bias, we have protocols for addressing them." Simone nodded, satisfied. The work was far from over, but they were making real progress. The board meeting that Harrison Blackwood had demanded had taken place a month after the incident. Several longtime members had expressed concerns about the changes, but Simone had stood firm. "This club can be exclusive without being discriminatory," she had told them. "We can maintain high standards without making assumptions about who meets those standards based on appearance." Some members had canceled their memberships, but they had been replaced by new members who were attracted to the club's commitment to inclusion. Nick Chapman had followed up on his original story with a feature about the club's transformation, which had been nominated for a regional journalism award. "The Pinnacle Club has become a model for how businesses can address discrimination," he wrote. "Not through quiet fixes or private conversations, but through public accountability and systematic change." The story had inspired other business owners to examine their own practices and policies. Dr. Ellis had become a regular consultant for the club, conducting monthly training sessions and helping to refine policies as needed. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable," she told Simone during one of their regular check-ins. "You've created a template that other businesses can follow." "The template was always there," Simone replied. "It just required someone willing to implement it." Brad Stevens had found a new job as a night security guard at an office building. The incident at the Pinnacle Club had been a wake-up call for him, and he was working with a counselor to understand his own biases and how they had affected his behavior. "I realize now that I wasn't just doing my job," he told his counselor during one of their sessions. "I was enforcing my own assumptions about who belonged where." It was difficult work, but it was necessary work. Emily Gates had taken a position at a smaller fitness facility where she was working to implement some of the inclusive practices she had learned about after her firing. "I failed at the Pinnacle Club," she told her new boss, "but I'm determined not to make the same mistakes again." Kyle Morrison had enrolled in college, where he was studying social work. The incident had been a turning point for him, helping him understand how his inaction had contributed to discrimination. "I thought not being actively racist was enough," he wrote in an essay for his sociology class. "But I learned that staying silent in the face of discrimination is its own form of harm." The essay was published in the campus newspaper and shared widely on social media. One evening, as Simone was finishing her workout, she ran into Lindsay Cooper, the marketing executive who had recorded the original incident. "I want to thank you," Lindsay said, "for handling that situation with such grace and determination." "Thank you for recording it," Simone replied. "Documentation is important. It makes it harder for people to deny what happened." "How do you feel about everything that's happened since then?" Simone considered the question. 3 months ago, she had been a successful business owner who preferred to keep her ownership quiet. Now she was a public figure, an advocate for inclusion, and a symbol of how to respond to discrimination. "I feel hopeful," she said finally. "Not because discrimination is gone, it's not, but because we've proven that it's possible to create spaces where everyone truly belongs." She looked around at the club, at the diverse mix of members working out, chatting, and simply existing comfortably in the space. "This is what I wanted when I bought this place," she said. "Not just a successful business, but a place where success is measured by how welcome everyone feels." As she left the club that evening, Simone passed the new mission statement in the lobby. Below it was a smaller plaque that read, "Inclusion is not a program or a policy. It's a practice that requires constant attention and commitment." It was a reminder that the work was never finished, that creating inclusive spaces required ongoing effort and vigilance. But as she walked out into the Chicago evening, Simone felt satisfied that they were doing that work. One interaction at a time, one day at a time, one member at a time. The Pinnacle Athletic Club had become more than just a gym. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people committed to doing better, to being better, to creating spaces where everyone could belong. And that, Simone knew, was worth all the work it had taken to get there. The story of that night had rippled out far beyond the club's walls, inspiring conversations about discrimination, accountability, and the responsibility of business owners to create inclusive environments. It had shown that change was possible, but only when people were willing to do the difficult work of confronting bias and systemic discrimination. Most importantly, it had shown that belonging wasn't something that should have to be earned or proven. It was something that should be given freely, generously, and without question. As the club's new motto proclaimed, "A space where everyone belongs, everyone is valued, and everyone is welcome." It was a simple statement, but it represented a revolutionary idea that inclusion wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the foundation of true success.